I've just got to tell you about an experience I had last month on a fantastic trip that Kelly and I took to New England. We saw so many inspiring and beautiful sights. We met so many wonderful new friends, and we have a new reverence, really, for the courage and strength and sacrifice of the men and women who lived and worked and fought and died right there to bring freedom to life. Do you remember the video we put up 3 years ago about the Anvil Monument in the cemetery in Massachusetts? Well, on the trip that Kelly and I recently got home from to the Northeast, I got a chance to visit that. I had to visit it. It was as close perhaps as I'll ever come to having made a pilgrimage. And I'm about to bring you up to speed on part of that trip, part of what was really new to us about the granite in the Northeast and how that tied into the life of George W. Burdick as I was made aware of it by Paul Tacy. And let me throw this out before you get a look at that video that we put up 3 years ago. Paul died a year and a half before we made it back to Massachusetts. I didn't get to meet him. I didn't even get to meet Deb. But I'll tell you this, Deb made it possible for me to find the monument in the cemetery in Monson. This is a letter from Paul Tacy, Ashfield, Massachusetts, that I can't paraphrase and I can't abbreviate. I just have to read it to you and show you the pictures that are in here. Just so amazing. Dear Scott, I've been a carpenter and contractor all my life. But before I retired 5 years ago, I had the misfortune of holding down a desk job for 3 years. Every noon, I escaped to take my lunch to a nearby cemetery and enjoy the solitude. Each day with my sandwich, I would gaze at this headstone. I was astounded at the stonework, of course. It was beautifully brought to life by an unknown master craftsman from granite quarried less than a mile away. But what had struck me most was the poignant sentiment it conveyed. It says clearly that he laid down his hammer on the anvil and draped his apron upon it for the last time in 1899. The unwritten message, quote, "His work is done," close quote, just radiates from this amazing work of art. My mind would conjure up endless visions of this man, how he lived, and who saw so deeply into his soul to be able to eulogize him so eloquently in granite. My dear wife, Deb, used her uncanny skill at genealogical research to find out more about this man. Records show that he was a very well-respected member of the community, offering his time to the local fire department and other selfless acts to benefit his fellow man. The list of most influential citizens of Hampden County, dated 1895, states, George W. Burdick, who for the past 28 years has wrought at the forge and anvil, and whose toilful career has been crowned with well-merited success. At his shop, within sight of his final resting place, he developed new ideas in iron and marketed them nationally. His stock in trade was stonemason tools, including the Boss hammer. And included with this is an extract from a newspaper page with the advertisement for George's Boss hand hammers in place. $1.50 would buy a hand-forged hammer. He had 12 children, 2 of whom also took up the blacksmithing trade. His son James continued his father's business at the same location. Deb even found photos of the destruction to his house and shop during a famous hurricane and flood that struck the Northeast in 1838. I have shared my feelings about this experience with others, the response being a polite, "That's nice." Then about 6 months ago, I stumbled upon your YouTube channel. I soon realized you would understand and that I had to share this with you. So I recently made the 100-mile round trip with my wife so she could take these photos. Enjoy. Best regards, Paul Tacy. As Kelly and I were working our way back down from Maine, through Manchester, New Hampshire, Leominster, Massachusetts, and heading to Monson, It was getting dark. We were fighting time. But the directions that Deb sent me made it possible for me to drive into Monson, how beautiful that little town is, and then work our way through the town and find the cemetery. And as I drove into that little quiet, purposeful, well-manicured and beautiful spot of the world, I know I was feeling a lot of what Paul felt when he would go there to sort of absorb what he could absorb from what has to be one of the most unique and frankly inspiring headstones on the planet. So Kelly and I made a further connection that I think I am justified in sort of including in this narrative. I have no evidence for it, except that the granite that we marveled at in the Northeast was absolutely fundamental, as near as we can tell, to everything about the Northeast. And I can tell you it's fundamental to Monson. We didn't see anything more impressive than the library with the clock tower in Monson. There are 2 or 3 other public buildings and other sculptures that are just as beautiful and had to have been wrought by the same men using tools that George Burdick forged in the same town. How else could it be that the immaculate stonework on those buildings is reflected in the immaculate stonework on his headstone? Now, I don't know if that's true. There's no way I can know if that's true, but I know it's true. You can just see that some of the people who were so skilled and so attentive and so professional in the work they did on those buildings in the middle of George's career had to have been involved in the meticulous attention to detail that's exhibited in his headstone. I didn't expect that when I made it to Monson. We were blown away to see the work there. We were comforted to see the evidence of love in the headstone itself. So Deb Tacy and I have been continuing to correspond, and she has sent me a video that Paul made in his shop. He was a craftsman. He wasn't just a builder, he was a furniture maker, and he did that for love. His desk job was not a good fit for him. And I just wonder, and if any of you know any of the descendants of George W. Burdick, you might just let them know that the headstone and the monument and the evidence of craft left by George was a comfort to another craftsman from Massachusetts, and maybe to some of you, in much the same way that it's been to me. Well, Kelly and I have traveled a long ways to the Northeast over the last week, and we've seen wonderful things and made wonderful friends. And of all the things that I remember about this trip, this is going to be right up at the top. Now, George was a blacksmith. He was a fine blacksmith, and he spent his toilsome career, as it is referred to in his obituary, forging tools for the granite industry right here. I don't care how far you travel, you're never going to see another marker like this. And you're not going to see many that speak so powerfully of the career of the man and the love of his family for him and his wife. How they must have loved their parents to do this. May it be so for you and I. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.
Not good. So it appears I need to clean up the bed of my lathe, and I'm way overdue for doing that. And I'm going to use the same procedure I've used on all the cast iron surfaces in the shop, on my table saw, my spindle sander, joiner, bandsaw. They all get roughly the same treatment, and I'm going to walk through what I use and how I'm going to do that. In order to clean up the bed of the lathe, I'm going to need a few things, and this is the list. Nitrile gloves to protect my dainty hands. That's only for the first step and the very last step. Second is some paper towels, or rags, shop towels, to clean up after the first step or two. And this little guy is a rust remover called Sandflex. You can get these at Woodcraft and other places, made by Klingspor. These are great things. They're abrasive, squishy pads, and they come in 3 different grits: coarse, fine, and medium. This is a coarse grit. This is what we'll be using. We're also going to be using an 8-inch file, and we'll show you what that's about in a little bit. The initial step is to clean up the bed with a little mineral spirits. You could use naphtha, acetone if you're really adventurous. Next, we're going to protect the top once it's all cleaned up with T9, Bow Shield T9. We'll talk more about that later. And the final step is to apply a coat, maybe 2 coats of paste wax. Just about any paste wax will do it. I use Mosier's for a lot of reasons, for a lot of things. Not only on my equipment, but also on my finished woodworking projects. And we're going to need some time. And of course, a little bit of elbow grease. I like this. Let's get started. The first step is to give the surface a good cleaning with mineral spirits. I'm using mineral spirits. As I said, you could use naphtha or any solvent. What we're doing here is basically removing the wax that was already on the bed, any crud that was been accumulating ever since the last time we did this. Just wash it down real well. Keep turning the paper towel so you keep getting a clean surface. You'll keep getting more and more off. You don't have to get it all off at this point, but at least it helps to keep the next step, the block, from clogging. And of course, please spread out the paper towels when you're done. Don't crumple them up. Spread them out and lay them to dry. Otherwise, you'll burn your shop to the ground for sure. Now we're poking through the kindling box, and because the next step is where we're going to require a little bit of our good old elbow grease. And here we go, starting to rub the Sandflex block across the surface. You can begin to see the top layer of oxidation, maybe a little bit of rust on this. I don't know. I didn't see a lot of rust, but you get it down to bare metal. It takes some scrubbing, takes a little bit of time, but if you keep at it, you'll find that it comes away pretty quick, pretty easy. It's not too bad. If you're doing a table saw top or something like that, a larger surface, be prepared to spend a goodly amount of time. A small thing like the bed here on the lathe doesn't take too much time, but you want to make sure that you get it good and clean. Take your time, and eventually you'll find yourself at the other end. See how shiny that's becoming now with the Sandflex block taking it down. The block does wear away as you're using it, which exposes new grit. The grit goes throughout the block, which is kind of like the aluminum oxide grinding wheels that we use on our grinders. So as it wears away, it's constantly exposing new grit. And I also do the underside of the banjo to clean that up. As I say, it crumbles away, so you want to make sure you vacuum up the debris before the next step, and just get it good and clean. We're almost done. A couple of swipes with the file will clean up the tool rest to make your tools slide a little easier. Then we add the bow shield. A little bit of that goes a long way. Just lay it down there and then rub it in with another paper towel and just let it sit and let it dry for a couple of hours at least. You can leave it overnight and let it soak down into the metal. Bow shield T9. This is great stuff. Wait a minute. Actually, this is great stuff. But this stuff is great. It's made by the Boeing Corporation or Boeing Company, and they have some pretty clever engineers, and they can build airplanes and keep hundreds of people up in the air, so I figured how tough can it be to make a lubricant. So I put off buying it for years. It's not cheap, but eventually, 6 months ago, I finally did spring for it, and I've used it on table saw, planer bed, just now on the lathe bed, and it does work great, as advertised. You spray it on, let it dry for a while, and it actually soaks into the metal and protects it. So, give this stuff a shot, and don't use this on your table saw top. It'll make a hell of a mess. We're almost done. Before we apply the paste wax, we want to wipe down the remainder of the bow shield. And it should be pretty well dry by this point, but you want to wipe it down. And then we apply at least one good liberal coat of paste wax, and this will help protect the surface as well. As I said, this is about the last step. Sometimes I'll apply 2 coats, and I think I did here in this case. And I also apply a coat of paste wax also to the bottom of the banjo and all the moving parts within the banjo, and that keeps the rust at bay there as well, and helps it glide a little easier across the lathe bed. And then while I'm at it, I also will apply a good coat on the top of the tool rest, and that helps the turning tools glide much easier across the tool rest. You'd be amazed what a difference that makes. Here's a tip: if you're claustrophobic like I am inside these gloves, a little squirt of compressed air down in there loosens them up pretty well, so you can just slip them off. And then a little bit of a wipe down and buff out that paste wax, and we're just about there. Going to make a big difference. What a difference the paste wax and the bow shield makes for things sliding across your cast iron. Doesn't take long, and it's well worth the effort. My lathe is all cleaned up, and we should be good for another year or so before the rust starts to accumulate again. During the summer here in New England, sometimes the humidity gets a little high, and some of the cast iron surfaces begin to show a little film of rust, and I want to take care of that as soon as that happens. In between, I will just generally give a coat of paste wax or two to just help protect it, but usually a year or so, maybe sometimes longer, before I have to go through the whole process. It should go without saying, but the folks that make the products that I use here don't know I exist. I get paid by no one to endorse a product, and if I ever did, I would certainly let you know. But I use these because they work for me. I've tried other products, and I've come to a few that I like, and I thought I would pass it on because I think perhaps it might be products that you like as well. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I will see you again the next time. Thanks.